News of a second Sputnik carrying a dog confirmed the opening of the space age. Enclosed in an air-conditioned capsule, the dog, a female called Laika, was history's first space passenger.
We had a pretty large bang associated with the caution and warning now. Okay, as we have an apparent serious oxygen leak.
4, 3, 2, 1.
Houston, we've had a problem. He's in a roll and he can't stop it. Performing an evasive maneuver. Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here. I think we need to do a little more all-weather testing. Welcome to space.
Welcome, listener, to Failure to Launch, the space history podcast where we take you through all the mistakes, failures, and explosions that made space exploration possible. As always, we're your hosts. I'm Chris, a man with a million thoughts and few facts.
And I'm a metaphor for Chris, a man with no thoughts and many facts.
And I am Quinn, the man with an encyclopedic knowledge of the least useful space facts. And I will be guiding my friends here through our story today.
The journey of self-discovery.
Yes. Of
self-discovery
a
and dog
journey
corpses.
of discovery, a journey of discovery for us and hopefully for you, listener, who, if you listen through this episode, will learn some very fun, very depressing info that will not serve you in any way, shape, or form in your day-to-day life.
But remember, it will haunt you.
Enjoy.
Something for the holiday.
Let's get into this. So, Chris's,
Balls deep.
do you guys like dogs?
I've sent you multiple pictures of the dog that resides.
I mean, I'm not a dog person, but I can accept and understand dogs.
Okay, all right. I feel like then you might enjoy this episode as well as any listeners because this one has a lot of dogs. Today we
Don't
are
you
going to be
Touch
talking.
my heartstrings, you bastard.
I'm gonna have to. I'm sorry. This also might have to be the first episode where we give like a content warning. Some of this does get a little grim because today we are talking about the Soviet Canine Cosmonaut program and Laika, the first animal in space. Right off the bat, what do you guys know about Laika?
She's adorable.
Okay.
Spunky little canine. She was the backup.
I've
That's really
internalized this concept that Laika is a husky.
You are wrong.
Yeah, so Sputnik 2 is this topic that I feel a lot of people think they know about, but they're really missing the forest for the trees. You know, everyone knows that the Soviets launched a dog named Laika into orbit and that she died there. And generally, that's it. There's even a lot of disagreement on, you know, how she died or when she died. It's sort of a, like, did Hitler shoot himself or poison himself kind of situation. And I'm hoping we can kind of shine a light on this story because in reality, it is so much worse than just a dead dog. And from like how it got started to even why it had to happen in the first place to how much of a shit show it was just from start to finish.
Look at her.
She's really cute. She's not a husky, and she's cute.
Guess what? You're bonding with her, and that's going to bite you.
The reason you probably think of her as a husky is because there is a breed of dog that has that exact same name. That is definitely not the tiny little yappy mutt that Laika actually was. And like a lot of our episodes, to really explain why things happen the way they do, I need to set the scene and explain the politics because there is a lot of fun politics to go over.
A lot of dead dogs.
Funny you should say that. So
You sound like a lawyer friend, and I don't like it sometimes.
So
Content warning. If you couldn't watch John Wick, do not continue.
If you did watch John Wick, don't continue. We know what happens.
If you don't like the idea of John Wick, of that scene, that one scene in John Wick happening about 8 times, maybe skip this one.
With people dabbing in the background, yeah, just no.
So Where we last left off in the good old US of SR, Sputnik, or Simple Satellite 1, or PS1, or our BP Ball, launched into orbit on October 4th, 1957. If you're interested in learning more about that, we have a 3-part series on it, but long story short, Sputnik launches and the world collectively freaks out. Overnight, the Soviet Union goes from an oppressive backwater to a beacon of scientific enlightenment. And while he initially ignored the launch because he was too busy purging his enemies, Khrushchev was soon riding high, and he decided to summon his new favorite rocket scientist, Sergei Korolev, to Moscow to celebrate.
Sergei's wild ride.
It keeps going. Yeah, this started off with him lying to Khrushchev, and that's going to continue. So there in Moscow on October 10th, at a lavish breakfast party for Korolev and his scientists, our hero, Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, makes a special request. November 7th would be the 40th anniversary of the start of the Bolshevik Revolution. Khrushchev had invited the leaders of every communist nation and wanted to impress them with Soviet achievements, especially the rebellious chairman Mao. Sputnik already played heavily into the event. Every citizen in Moscow was given Sputnik pins and decorations. Banners were draped everywhere, and giant models of the satellite were even set up like all along Red Square. But Khrushchev wanted something bigger. At the breakfast, he approached Sergei Korolev and said, "Sergei Pavlovich, as you know, the October Revolution Jubilee is approaching. It'll be 40 years of Soviet power, which is a big milestone. Wouldn't it be nice to have something for the holiday?"
This is my favorite. This is my favorite story. This just sounds like the troubled marriage couple where the wife comes up to the husband and just asking for some like obscene thing. You know, like a.
No,
wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we had a new Mercedes?
There's no recording of this scene, but I can picture it in my head. You know that whenever he said the "wouldn't it be nice to have something for the holiday,"
his hand was on his shoulder, and he was looking him in the eyes, and he's like,
you can see him tilting his head slightly to the side, like the conspiratorial, like, "Hey, wouldn't it be nice to have something for the holiday?" Like,
that is when he blasted 10 pounds of shit into his pants and said, "Oh God, oh God, oh God, yes, sir."
Funny you should say that. Khrushchev is asking for another. It's been less than a week since Sputnik 1 launched, and he's already demanding more.
Why don't you look me in the eyes when we make love? That kind of.
And if there's anything we know about Korolev, it's that he is a man who sees an opportunity and grabs it. So whenever Khrushchev asks him, he immediately blurts out, "What about a dog?"
Just dig your grave a little bit deper. Make room for your staff.
Yeah, so he,
and then Khrushchev's like, "Wonderful idea. I love dogs."
And he has
that's exactly what happened. And point of fact, as we'll talk about in a bit, Korolev also loves dogs. Like, these are both dog lovers. Khrushchev loves the idea. He immediately greenlights it, and he sends Korolev off with whatever resources he needs. I'm going to ask a quick question. Can you guess why having all the resources he needs won't matter one fucking iota?
Because he's about to do some pretty despicable things, and also there's the fact that life living in a different medium is going to be hard.
I'm gonna those are good answers. I'm gonna make it a little bit easier.
Nothing about the mission will change other than we're stuffing a dog in a Sputnik.
He has less than a month to do this. This happens on the 10th of October, and the deadline is the 7th of November.
Yeah, that dog is going in the orb, whether it wants to or not. Get used to it.
And they are going to cobble together the most interesting and coolest rocket and satellite ever built. So to better explain the situation, Korolev got himself.
I love this. We're going back to Object D, which is probably still sitting in a warehouse somewhere. The coolest and greatest rocket satellite launch ever.
Carve it up, shove a dog in.
It's just we're gonna put another ball, and this time instead of a beeping instrument inside, we're gonna shove a dog in there.
It's the
and
barking ball.
Object D is just sitting there in a dark warehouse somewhere.
That is a fair point. Well, like, okay, to be completely fair, Object D isn't actually done at this point. The reason Sputnik 1 was launched instead of Object D is because Object D, it still needs a lot of development time. It's not sitting there and ready to go. Although at the same time, yeah, like all of the scientists who complained about Sputnik 1, they're not happy about this either, because on top of it not giving them a load of data they can play with, Korolev has also roped them into into a rush job with less than a month. So to better explain the situation Korolev got himself into, I'm going to quote from the great book Red Moon Rising. Quote, Korolev's mind must have been racing throughout the exchange. He had the parts to assemble one more rocket. Otherwise, the next batch of R7s would not be ready until January 1958. So he had a launch vehicle. But what about a satellite? Nothing was ready on that front, and he couldn't simply replicate PS1. Whatever he came up with had to top the original Sputnik, be better, bigger, and create an even greater sensation. The bar was significantly raised, and the time frame was beyond brutal. It had taken 3 years to launch Sputnik. Khrushchev was giving him barely 3 weeks. Like, this is the first thing that people do not know about with the launch of Laika. He had 3 weeks to do this. He had 26 days to get this done.
You're getting in the orb whether you want to or not.
This has to be like the greatest rush job ever done. The satellite would have to be made from scratch. But his first task is just assembling all of his staff. After the launch of Sputnik 1, most of them are given vacations and told to go as far from Kazakhstan as possible. All of his top engineers were sent to a luxury resort in Sochi.
POV, you're getting dragged back to Kazakhstan.
Yes.
It's time. Fellas, we have to go back to Turatam. And then it's like he's trying to corral cats into a train to take them back.
These guys have been in Turatam for 9 months, working, getting sick, and
I
being
hope your
carted home.
1 day vacation is been enjoyable.
At best, they get a long weekend away. And then,
they're just settling in now, and meanwhile they go to kick the doors down to escape, and we just have the men waiting to drag them back.
Khrushchev made this a national priority. So Korolev, he does have the keys to the kingdom with this. He recruits everyone to help him assemble all of these scientists and engineers. So the same bombers that Khrushchev had converted into airliners were sent rushing around the Soviet Union collecting all of these dudes. He even recruits the KGB to track down some of the ones who are further out, or if they're in Latvia or Estonia or something.
The ones who don't want to come back.
You've just launched Sputnik. It's a huge political thing. People are giving speeches. The KGB knocks on your fucking door. You think you're going to the gulag, and then they're just like, "Hi, we're here to take you back to work."
I was just saying worse. You're going back to Turatam.
Yeah, it's hey, just wanted to let you know Monday's a work day. We're starting at 8 a.m. So gotta be there. Gotta punch in.
You open the door and the KGB agents identify themselves. You think you're about to go freeze your ass off in a Siberian gulag when they inform you that you're going to go back to melting you're going to go back to baking in the Kazakhstani sun in Turatam.
You're gonna go get giga tetanus in fucking Kazakhstan.
You're gonna get the disease that mimics radiation poisoning.
But this time you actually just get radiation poison. Yeah. There's no fun.
So all told, Turatam's staff was only fully assembled by the 12th of October. I need to be clear about this. At that point, Sputnik 2 did not exist, not even in the planning phase, and it had to be launched by the 7th of November, 26 days away.
Fuck every single inch of that.
So yeah, Chris, you're an engineer like me, right? And so you have an understanding and appreciation for procedure, safety regulations, and dimensions. You like dimensioning, right?
They haunt my dreams.
Okay, but you can understand why they're important. The thing that haunts your dreams is when things go wrong.
Exactly.
Right? So
when rush jobs go through, and then suddenly it's, you don't mind if it's, an inch too short, right? Oh, you mean the thing that's going to cause the fucking thruster to fail to gimbal and kill the craft? Yeah, no, don't worry about that. Cheers. I'll sit next to you in the gulag and stab you.
You're going to have fun with this next section, I think.
Pain. I think you said pain wrong, but let's continue.
So the corners Korolev and his I'm not kidding here. The corners Korolev and his team had to cut are enough to make any engineer cringe. First off, quality control out the window. Don't need it.
My primary discipline. Thanks.
Engineers made rough drawings and handed them directly to machinists to be built on the spot.
Make something that looks like this. Fuck you.
Here's a napkin drawing of a satellite where the E is written backwards. Go. Yeah, so they also decided to remove the satellite separation mechanism completely from the R7. So unlike Sputnik 1, Sputnik 2 would just be bolted on top of the main booster. It would not separate. It would not fly off on its own. Now, this had pros and cons. The benefits, on top of just being very quick and saving a lot of work, were that it let the satellite use the booster's telemetry and battery systems. It also saved an enormous amount of weight because, surprisingly, those separation mechanisms are incredibly heavy. The downside was that the booster's transmitters consumed way too much power to be run continuously. And they got around this by building a timer to only run the systems while it was over Soviet ground stations, about 15 minutes out of every 90-minute orbit. As with everything else in the project, this timer was both slapdash and ingenious. You want to guess what they used?
3 bed clocks.
Oh, come on.
No, that is an honest guess. You have to have a primary, a secondary, and a tertiary. Because if you think I'm going to leave my fucking space rocket up to one shitty one, and God forbid that first one fails. No. I'd go for 2 completely separate mechanisms.
You read the script. You had to have, because yeah, like it was the timer. The timer was built with 3 alarm clocks that they stole from the Turatam barracks.
No, I refuse this.
They just taped together 3 alarm clocks and just shoved it in there.
Because the alarm clocks had 5-minute timers and they needed a 15-minute timer.
That's so much worse.
Yeah.
So what? They just had a machine that took them all back, and then suddenly we just have 5 minutes these chained together. That is vile. That is. I'm sorry, but fuck that.
And okay, so after sorting out all those issues, and I say sorting out with like the biggest air quotes I can manage, the engineers then turned their attention on the satellite's passenger and how to keep it alive for a little while at least. Because the technology to return a satellite to Earth didn't exist yet, the flight would be one way. Still, the capsule would have to keep a dog alive for up to 7 days. They figured that, like with Sputnik, their triumph would be a little bit dampened if the dog died immediately. So they had all kinds of plans to keep the dog alive, and then they immediately scrapped most of them. Plans for an automatic dog feeder were scrapped and replaced with a simple tin full of food and water mixed into a sort of like dog kibble jello. Just before launch, the lid was opened on the tin, giving the dog access to the meal. And that was, that's life support right there.
Just imagine you're some poor dog about to get blasted into space. The human opens up this appetizing tin of what is this, but it's delicious. And then suddenly, what is that noise?
It's dark. Everything is shaking. There's so much noise. But then, like, a little thing in front of you creaks open, and there's kibble in there. And it's like,
oh fuck,
dude,
yeah.
hell yeah, this isn't so bad.
I hope I get to enjoy this for some time.
Yeah. It's warm in here. They also designed a rudimentary. Okay, so speaking of that, they also designed a rudimentary air conditioning system for the capsule, except it was designed to the wrong tolerances. They built it wrong. When the fan wouldn't give the proper airflow, the engineers just rotated it and jimmied it and bent it into place to get it to fit. Instead of that's how much of instead of waiting to build another, they were just force it, strip the bolts,
just fuck it into place, it'll work.
Yes.
I just hate that even more. Just, what do you mean it's not working? Just force it. That obviously fixes everything, right? What do you mean we bent some tabs? Just flick them back in.
This satellite is by mass 5% duct tape and 10% Loctite.
It just keeps getting worse.
So, Oleg Gazenko, one of the dog trainers, described the whole rushed design process like this. And someone can take this one.
We did not have time to produce blueprints and then look for someone who could do the job. We'd say, maybe we can do it this way. All right, let's do it.
Okay, so as a group of hopefully professionals, how do we all feel about this approach?
Just force it.
I don't know if I enjoy it.
Yeah. Don't worry, just, bend some corners. Just push it. Ship it.
Yeah.
Fuck it. We ball. Fuck it. We ball.
We ballin' on last.
Yeah, like sometimes you make some mistakes. That's why pencils have erasers. Listen, it's only got to support a dog for a week. What's the worst that could happen?
I hate you. Why do you have to say it? My poor girl.
We'll get there. Now, the satellite part of Sputnik 2 was made up of two main components. There was a dog capsule that they took directly from earlier rockets, and the top was a backup of Sputnik 1. So the pressurized capsule underneath held the dog and provided life support, while the Sputnik bolted on top handled all of the satellite stuff, so like systems, instruments to monitor the capsule. Before mounting to the R7, Sputnik 2 was about 4 meters tall and weighed 6 times as much as Sputnik 1. Even with all, yeah, it was huge.
That's Titanic.
Yeah. For context, Sputnik 1 weighed about 180 pounds. This thing weighed over a ton. And even with a load of other parts stripped off, it was like this thing was pushing the limits of the R7's capabilities. And that's only if everything flew perfectly. Remember that like Sputnik 1 had a launch malfunction and it still wound up in a decent orbit. The only reason it was able to reach orbit at all was because of how light it was. The R7 had some wiggle room whenever it was launching that one. If the same thing happened with Sputnik 2, it would not reach orbit and would burn up on re-entry, dog and all.
It would burn up like Korolev's chance at living.
I know I'm repeating this, but modern rockets have tolerance built in for malfunctions. They launch with more fuel and thrust than they need to in case things go wrong. This is like how an airliner flies with enough fuel that it can, change course a little bit, go to another airport or fly in a holding pattern for a while. Hauling Sputnik 2, on top of being like the most slapdash rush job ever, it had like razor thin margins. So it has to be built like crap quickly, and it has to be better.
Especially margins that are probably already getting annihilated by cutting corners to make it quicker.
Man, this sounds so much like my old job.
Just do it faster, do it better, do it cheaper, all at once, go.
It sounds like my current job, except we're facing the fallout immediately.
The quality, cost, time efficiency triangle.
The engineering triangle,
Let's just ignore that is a thing that exists at all and just do everything.
I want you to hit all 3 corners at once. Go.
What do you mean you can't hit all 3 at once? What am I paying you for?
So, speaking of dogs, that was the next problem the engineers had to sort out. Finding a passenger for their satellite. Thankfully, the Soviets had a well-established Canine Cosmonaut program to draw spare parts, experience, and recruits from. As early as 1951, the USSR was launching trained dogs into space on these like suborbital rocket flights, a lot like the American monkey flights. And I think it's important to roll the clock back a bit and talk about the earlier program to better explain why and how the first animal in orbit was a small stray dog picked off of the streets of Moscow.
The way that you referred to a
spare
Soviet
parts.
space dog program as having spare parts.
Yeah.
I wanted to comment on
makes
that.
me sound like it makes it sound like to me like they are just assembling a dog out of various bits out of a bin.
Makes me sound like a well-adjusted individual.
The Soviet Space Dog Program.
The Soviet dog program, as much as we joke, it was not nearly as impersonal as you might think. Like as we'll talk about, they treated these dogs very well up until they died. Make of that what you will.
They probably had favorite ones too.
They did. This
one's my cute little girl.
Right off the bat, it's worth pointing out that in 1950, like the Cold War hadn't really heated up yet, and like Soviet side, like the Iron Curtain hadn't come down. Soviet and American scientists were still talking and exchanging data. And because of that, like the Soviet scientists had access to the earlier data from Project Albert. They didn't need to start blind and figure out if animals, explode whenever they're exposed to space. So instead of researching the physiological effects of zero-G, they focused on testing the effects of zero-G on the ability to perform tasks. This was something that actually hadn't really been tested. All of Project Albert's monkeys were like restrained and sedated during their entire flights. So the only data they could provide was physiological. Like they sent back heart rate.
Has the monkey died yet? Yes, no.
Does the monkey have a pulse? Yes or no? Cool. Science is done.
We have done good science, gentlemen.
And the Soviets looked at this and admittedly, like that has to be your first step. Like to be fair to the Americans and all of the monkeys they killed.
Can a living being exist in space? Because honestly,
you have to test that before you do anything else. Walk before you run. All that. The Soviets looked at this and they wanted to push it further because they eventually wanted to launch humans. That was a goal for them. So they'd need their test subjects to actually be conscious and able to react. So the first problem they ran into was picking what animals they launched to simulate humans. They thought about launching They thought about
Recenter yourself.
They thought about launching Americans, yeah, whatever. They thought about launching monkeys like the Americans had, and that had of course, the advantage of monkeys being very closely related to humans. But they worried that the monkeys would be untrainable. That they were completely wild, and like
Too
we
much
said,
thought.
I think they were also pretty stupid, but like
Enough thought to be a problem, but not enough to,
yeah, but also just not tame. In the American launches, they'd gotten around that because, like we said, every single monkey was unconscious. None of those monkeys knew they were going into space. They were unconscious before they went in the rocket, and they were, thankfully, I guess, unconscious when they died. The Soviets wanted to launch conscious animals so that they could measure their physiological and psychological responses.
Experience the
They tried
horrors of
small
space.
animals like rats. Yeah, they tried small animals like rats, but decided they were too difficult to track with sensors, especially because launch tends to raise a person's heart rate, let's say, and it was difficult to use rats as a background because they already have like incredibly fast heart rates. They eventually landed on dogs for a couple of reasons. First was, like we said, Sergei Korolev, the head of the Soviet space program, loved dogs.
I was just say it's kind of a weird way to say, "Hey, I love
to
dogs."
express his love.
Loft them into space. You'll love the stars, little one. Tell me how it is.
Man's best friend leading the way. You go first. Furthermore, dogs were viewed as being more trainable than monkeys, and while their physiology was far from human, they were thought to have closer personalities to people than monkeys did. They were also very easy to find. It was worried, though, that because dogs often have very unique personalities, each dog would react to the flights differently and kind of skew the data. But they solved this by just deciding to launch 2 dogs on every flight so they could compare and contrast the reactions. From Animals in Space, quote, "Preparing man's best friend to become an astronaut began with a rigorous screening process. One of the qualities required of the dog was obvious. They had to be small. To fit in the limited payload space, about 10 cubic feet of the R-1 rocket, along with all the collateral equipment, the ideal dog had to weigh between 13 and 16 pounds, slightly larger than a house cat. But being small was only the first of many qualities the successful canine candidate had to possess. Because dogs that were too old or too young did not react well to the harsh conditions, the age cutoff fell between 18 months and 6 years. Since the animals would be filmed during the flight under poor illumination in their cramped container, light-colored fur was an important factor. And because the sanitary device attached to the dog's clothing fit females better than males, only female dogs were used."
The light-colored fur one seems kind of just out there because, bleach exists.
I am going to be very fair to them. They were not doing cruel things to these dogs except launching them into space. And all of these flights were designed to bring them back. And at the same time, maybe they could have dyed the dogs or something, but they had so many to pick from that they might as well just pick the light colored ones.
Well, they pull them off the street.
So with this information, they set off to find their recruits. And they did this, and I'm being serious here, by wandering the streets of Moscow and picking up as many strays as they could.
It's a good idea, though.
Yeah. And this wasn't just because it was an easy way to find the candidates. They actually had a very good reason to pick these dogs. If you aren't aware, Moscow in winter is fucking cold and not an easy place to live.
You'll find a hardy animal out there.
Yeah, the researchers believe, probably correctly, that any dogs they found surviving on the streets would be tough as nails and used to dealing with cold and hunger, 2 things they would expect in space. And they needed to be tough because the training program for these dogs was brutal. Many dogs washed out and were either removed, given to employees as pets, or kept on the training as a control group. A few of them even died in training. Most of the training involved exposing the dogs to situations they might face during their flights, the first of which was spending a few hours in a cramped capsule. Each dog was dressed in a bulky flight suit and chained inside a small box, first for 1 hour, then 2 hours, then 4 hours. Dogs would eventually pass once they could stay in the box for several days on end. The whole idea with these tests is that they're just trying to gradually acclimatize the dogs to being in a spacecraft-like environment. So they get them used to wearing the flight suit. They get them used to sitting in a box. Eventually, they put the dogs in centrifuges to train them for high Gs. They put them on vibration plates for hours to get them used to the shaking and the noise. They put dogs on planes and they take them on parabolic flights to get them used to like little bits of 0G at a time. They put the dogs in pressure chambers to introduce them to the feeling of like sudden pressure changes. And finally, they take the dogs to give them a taste of the real thing out to watch test firings of the rocket engines, just to get them like used to the noise and the flame, to just give them the real deal.
Are you sure it's not to threaten them, just to say, that's going to be you soon? Get ready.
So this was on top of a battery of psychological tests meant to sort the dogs into one of two categories. Dogs suited for the short, violent ballistic flights were called rocket dogs, while those suited for the longer orbital flights became satellite dogs. Calmer dogs, like Laika, tended to be satellite dogs. So between 1951 and 1956, there would be 15 flights using the R-1 rocket, Korolev's original knockoff of the German V-2. On the 22nd of July, 1951, Desik and Saigon became the first dogs in space, blasting to an altitude of 120 kilometers and being safely recovered. Unfortunately, like Project Albert, parachute problems were frequent. A few months after her flight, Desik flew again, this time with a dog named Lisa. Their parachute failed on re-entry, and both dogs were killed. 4 other dogs would be killed in similar crashes. In 1956, though, like the Soviets eventually they upgrade to the R-2A, which is a version of the R-2 rocket that is specifically made for these kind of suborbital tests.
Higher thrust, more capacity, that kind of thing.
Better parachutes.
Thank God.
Yeah, because they realize, like, oh, we have a high attrition rate of our candidates. We can't test a dead dog.
And I'm sure you're not going to have any backlash from the trainers that are emotionally bonding with these animals.
Yeah. And part of that, you did mention higher thrust, and that is true. Like with the new rocket, they're able to loft more equipment. And once they do that, like once they have this capability, they start focusing on the focus goes from testing the dog's survival to actually using the dogs as like full-on stand-ins for humans. So if you don't know, eventually when the Soviets would launch humans, Yuri Gagarin, whenever he came down from space, he didn't actually land with his capsule. His capsule had a fighter jet ejector seat built into it that fired him off at a safe altitude, and then he landed just under a parachute. And this is how they test that. So the dogs were trained with custom spacesuits, and the capsules were designed to eject the dogs at certain altitudes.
Oh, Jesus fucking Christ.
Yeah. And because, remember, they launched with 2 dogs, they wanted to figure out what the ideal altitude to drop the dogs from was. So they were able to just brute force it. Because they had 2 dogs, every flight could drop a dog at a different altitude and just let them parachute down. Some dogs would be like, they would be dropped at high altitude and just be floating on these canopies for like hours.
Just sitting there under the canopy, just this is my lot in life now.
Yeah, but I mean, they had spacesuits, so like they were breathing fine. All of this would allow the scientists to figure out the best way to safely recover a cosmonaut. And while these tests narrowed down the ideal altitude to eject a cosmonaut from his capsule, unfortunately, they also cost the life of 3 more dogs in parachute failures. Womp womp.
Maybe it's time we find out that, hey, our parachutes might be fucking scuffed. You want to fill that?
Parachute failure feels like it's such a common recurring theme in all of this early space stuff.
My fabric was obtuse and I died because
I feel the need to defend my my vocation. Parachute failures are not that, like, they do happen. They are not that common. This is like, with Project Albert and these dog launches, this is like an anomalous amount of parachute failures. And they're not even trying to do like big complicated parachutes. They're just trying to do like a round parachute and it lands. And they are repeatedly fucking that up and getting their test subjects killed. Are
their riggers just idiots?
Maybe. I don't know. There's no mention of this. It's just treated as like, oh, this happens. I'm sure the people who made those parachutes, instead of admitting to being incompetent, just told like the Soviets and the Americans, 1 in 3 parachutes is supposed to fail. That's normal.
Don't worry, guys. It's okay.
I'm a professional. Po buddy's nerfect. All told, until it's I found a part in the script that doesn't really line up. All told, by the time of Sputnik 2, there were 22 dog launches. All in all, the Soviet dog program would eventually have 20 casualties, Laika included.
She wants to be included.
No, I'm gonna keep that in. Cat cameos are a thing in podcasts.
She agrees. She does not like dogs.
As for what it accomplished, I'm going to quote from Major General Alexei Pokrovsky, the director of the Institute of Aviation Medicine. Quote, According to the report, these experimental flights had clearly established 4 critical findings. 1. The use of spacesuits protected the animals during flight and recovery. 2. The method of ejecting the animals from the rocket proved effective. 3. The system of parachutes ensured a safe descent. I'm going to need some extra info on that. And 4. A short flight of 1 hour into the upper atmosphere did not cause any substantial change in the behavior of the dog or cause any physiological harm. Part of, like, that makes sense to me, but another part of me is just like, we have found this critical finding. The use of spacesuits protected the animals.
Did you just wang a couple up there and go, wow, they died?
Yeah, did you try it without? What happened? Was the original plan to send Yuri out there with like a snorkel? What are you doing?
If he slurps the air hard enough, he will live.
The first cosmonaut suit was just a scuba suit.
I'm sure
this is the scientific equivalent of saying the benediction of activation when you turn your computer on, you know?
I'm pretty sure all of your
like, we don't know how it works, but if you do it the same way every time, the specific way, you'll be okay.
Picking the first space dog.
By the time Sputnik 2 comes around, like, this program is in full swing. And while Korolev's engineers were rushing to finish Sputnik 2, it fell to his scientists to select the first Canine Cosmonaut. Thankfully, they could leverage the extensive candidates trained for the earlier suborbital flights. Out of a group of 10, it was narrowed down to 3 candidates. Kudryavka would fly into orbit, Albinia would be her backup, and a dog called Muka would serve as the technical dog, used for testing all the satellite equipment and life support on the ground. You might notice the name Laika was not in there.
different names, that kind of thing going on?
So if you're wondering where the name Laika came from, it's because the Soviet dog launches played really fast and loose with the naming of their cosmonauts. It actually wasn't uncommon for dogs to pick up nicknames or to fly multiple times under different names. Sometimes even the names of dogs who died in launches were just given to the next set of trainees. In one particular case, when a dog named Bobik escaped on the day before his flight, a new candidate was found and given the acronym ZIB, meaning Replacement for Missing Dog Bobik.
Wait. Bobik escaped?
Yeah.
In Turatam.
No, sorry. These flights weren't. These flights were being done around Moscow. There were.
I was just saying, let's back up a little further.
Bobik just ran out into the desert. He's like, fuck this.
I was just saying, let's back up a little bit further. How about the fact that a dog escaped the Soviet state apparatus? That in and of itself is amazing.
Listen, they're used to using the dogs for finding people. This is
the dog has learned.
I don't know how it happened. All of the information I could find, though, agreed that he ran away on the day before his flight. And another note is that, yes, I know I said that all of the dogs were female. That was a rule, and yet at the same time, all of the information, all of the sources I can find confirm that Bobik was male, and I have no idea why.
He was a good boy.
As far as I can tell, he was the only male dog in this launch program, and he never launched.
He was the control group where they decided that they did not want to make a male spacesuit.
It would be too
complicated. It would be too complicated. We can't send him.
Dangly bits are complicated.
And so when he ran away, since he was never launching, it's like, forget about it. We'll just replace him. And then there's like, the problem sorted itself out. We're not going to tell Korolev. We're just going to get this replacement dog. It looks kind of like him, I think.
But then why would you name the dog Replacement Dog for Bobik? That was literally her name.
Listen.
Her name was ZIB, Zib.
She had a tragic accident, okay? She disagreed with state policy and got...
This is like swapping out someone's goldfish, except you name it Replacement Goldfish, and you like put that on the bowl.
And it looks radically different.
So, yeah, like many of her peers, Kudryavka, meaning Little Curly, was known by a few names. She was known by Limonchik, meaning Little Lemon. She was known by Zuchka, Little Bug. But the one that stuck was Laika, which means barker, given to her by the medical staff because of her loud and distinctive bark. For the sake of clarity with this episode, I'll just stick to Laika from here on out because that's the one that everyone knew her as. It was also a bit of a surprise that Laika was the one who was selected to go in the first place because she was not the best qualified candidate. She did perform very well in her tests, but it was Albinia, her backup, that scored best. But the researchers had reasons not to pick Albinia from Animals in Space. Quote, for starters, she had already flown twice before, and so it was reason that she had already done her part for science. Second, she had recently given birth to a litter of puppies, and it would not be right to take her from them. And perhaps the reason that carried the most weight, she was everyone's favorite, and they did not want to sacrifice her on this one-way mission.
Bastards.
So Laika got picked to fly on the suicide mission by being the least favorite dog while still having half-decent scores.
She talks too much. Get her out of here.
Oh my god.
She was a noisy A- student, but the A+ student was everyone's favorite. So they were just like, send her. Why not?
Everyone, if you have a reason to dislike Soviet sciences, there you go. They kill the A student. They kill what's called the B student.
So a lot of these dogs were already trained, but due to the extremely short timeline before the launch of Sputnik 2, the training they would receive for the actual orbital flights was bare bones and minimal. Yeah, and because these dogs were they were already highly trained, some of them were already veterans of their own flights, like Albinia. That really played in with Korolev and his engineers because remember, they were on an incredibly tight timeline. They did not have time to train these dogs. So everything about the dogs and their capsules going into Sputnik 2 was meant to, built to be as close to what they were trained on as possible. So the capsule they'd fly in was a modified version of the one that was already being used to launch dogs on those previous flights. So the last thing we talked about was her being the A- student that gets killed, but she was still an incredibly well-trained dog. Every one of these dogs that even be a candidate, they were incredibly well-trained. They had been through so many rigorous tests. And that played in really well with Korolev and his engineers because remember, with Sputnik 2, they were on an incredibly tight timeline and they did not have time to train these dogs for anything. It turned the main preparation they could actually do was for scientific purposes. Because the animal would never be recovered, all the physiological information had to be transmitted back to Earth. Taking readings for blood pressure proved difficult, so they actually opted for surgery. Both Laika and Albinia had their carotid arteries drawn out of their necks and sewn to a flap of skin.
Huh.
A collar they wore would periodically take the blood pressure by pressing on the artery. So they just took the dog's veins and just pulled them out of the neck, and then they just had one of those blood pressure things just poke them every now and then.
Periodically choke the dog out of it.
Yeah. Oh, and both dogs hated these collars, and most of the month before launch was just getting them used to this horrible contraption.
That dog gets a paper cut in the wrong place, and it is going to just leak.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I don't like that one.
No.
Bad takes 101.
To give a little, and I'm going to give a little bit of a background on Laika herself right now because she was a relative newbie to the dog program. She was 2 years old and a stray from the streets of Moscow, like most of the other candidates. She excelled in training and was known for her easygoing disposition and her loud, resonant bark. On October 27th, Laika was introduced to the Soviet Union. Unlike with Sputnik 1, which launched in secrecy, the Kremlin wanted everyone to know what they were about to do. Journalists were flown in to interview, quote-unquote, the Canine Cosmonaut, who obligingly barked into the microphones. That day, one of the scientists, Vladimir Yazdovsky, took Laika home to spend the night with his family, saying,
I wanted to do something nice for the dog. She had only a short time to live. See?
Oh, now back to the high energy.
Pull the heart out of my chest, why don't you?
After that, Laika and the other dogs were flown right to Tyuratam and prepped for launch. It's not well known, but Laika was actually in her capsule a full 3 days before the launch. This wasn't much of a problem for her because she'd been extensively trained to spend days in cramped, dark capsules. But it was a problem for her health because she was trapped in a metal can in the middle of a desert in Kazakhstan. There was a very real risk that she would get sick or die of heat stroke before launching. It got bad enough that some of the dog handlers and medical staff, they actually came up with a little scheme. Whenever they ask Korolev, he turns them down. No one is listening to their complaints, and they weren't allowed access to the dog. So shortly before launch, some of them complained to Korolev that they needed to immediately depressurize the capsule. They claimed it was so that they could monitor the change in pressure during launch, and Korolev believed them. In reality, they were trying to just give Laika a drink. In the 3 days sitting in the desert, most of her jellied food had dried out. And she didn't have anything else to eat. So with the green light from Korolev, the doctors loaded syringes with water and convinced the engineers to squirt them into Laika's food trough while they were depressurizing the capsule. The cabin was resealed and covered by a protective nose cone.
Give the dog a fucking sip.
Yes. I understand why they did it, but for me, I'm just thinking like all of these near misses that almost kill the dog, and they are desperately working. Like they like no one is. I need to be clear with this. They were not allowed access to the rocket. No one believed them whenever they said that Laika might die. So they had to literally lie to Korolev and sneak up and like convince an engineer to do this, like just to keep Laika alive. And all of this is just to keep her alive long enough so that she can die in space. I don't know. I get it. It's still weird for me to consider.
Oh, no, it is absolutely just... It really is weird. Like, nothing against the scientists, but the fate of the dog is ultimately known.
Yeah.
Like, this is not,
this is not kept secret.
Laika's flight and death.
Surprisingly, the second orbital flight of the R-7 went significantly better than the first. Sputnik 2 reached its orbit without problems and started transmitting back data on Laika's vitals. She reacted to the launch with fear, understandably, her heart rate and breathing spiking, but this was expected from earlier suborbital launches. But once she was in orbit, scientists noticed that her vitals were returning to normal, slower than on Earth, but it still implied that zero-G didn't cause any immediate physiological harm. The relief of the scientists was short-lived, though, as it became apparent that there was a severe problem in the spacecraft.
Yeah, this is what we were waiting for.
I hope you can hear me steaming a little bit over here.
Just like the dog.
An hour into the flight, engineers noticed that the temperature was rising, quickly reaching 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. What exactly caused this heating is still unknown. Laika's spacecraft was designed to stay attached to the R-7 booster, so it's possible waste heat slowly spread from the engines to the capsule. Like we talked about, there's a very common belief that the satellite was designed to separate from the booster, but it just failed to, when in reality, it just, like, there was no way it could have. It was just bolted on top. And because heat doesn't radiate well in space, those rocket engines that were just burning like incredibly hot, all of that heat is now soaking up through the booster all the way to the satellite. However, it's also possible that the detachable nose cone had damaged the capsule's heat shield whenever it was ejected. It had, like, broken something on the way out. In either case, the capsule's limited air conditioning could not counter the rising temperature. Around 6 hours into her flight, Laika's transmitted vital signs stopped completely. It's believed she died of stress and overheating. Do you guys think that matters much to the Soviets?
Matters to me.
Not to ruin this moment, but
not to the government.
You are correct. So, in a bid not to ruin the triumphant propaganda moment, the Soviets would continue to pretend that she was alive and that they were getting valuable data from her. As the Soviets developed and Soviet officials gave vague tidbits of information, it quickly became apparent that Laika would not be recovered, though no one admitted that she was already dead. As protests flared up in the West over unnecessary animal cruelty, the Soviets started to claim that Sputnik 2 was designed to humanely euthanize Laika once the mission was over, either through poisoned dog food, hypoxia, or like a poisoned needle. Others claimed that Laika had died on November 10th when Sputnik 2's batteries lost power and could no longer circulate oxygen. All of these were lies, and it would take until 2002 for the truth to come out. In a paper at the 2002 World Space Conference, Dr. Dmitry Malyshenkov, one of the scientists who worked on Sputnik 2, laid out the facts. Laika, the first dog in space, died between 5 and 7 hours after launch from heat and stress.
Rest in peace, old girl.
Yep. Young girl, 2 years old.
The world's reaction to Sputnik 2.
So, while Laika's death and the ethics of animal experimentation dominate the modern image of Sputnik 2, in early November 1957, the focus was on the satellite, the rocket, and what it meant. From Red Moon Rising.
Soviets orbit second artificial moon. Communist dog in space.
screamed the headlines on the morning of Monday, November 4th, 1957, as Americans awoke to another media riot and fresh rounds of recriminations.
What's next?
Demanded the New York Herald Tribune incredulously.
A man on the moon?
Moscow mission to Mars in near future?
The Washington Star speculated, its editorial dripping with defeat and resignation.
Shoot the moon, Ike!
Urged the feistier Pittsburgh press, suggesting defiantly that the White House blow the offending Soviet satellite to smithereens. I like the last one.
Just shoot it. To send an astronaut up there with a 1911 and just start blasting.
Never mind the fact that the whole point of Sputnik panic is that the US didn't have the capability to do that if they wanted to. So yeah, just as Sputnik panic had rocked the West a month earlier, Sputnik 2 set off a firestorm in the governments, media, and public of the world. While the Soviets were tight-lipped about Laika's status, they clearly shared details about her spacecraft. Like we talked about, compared to Sputnik 1, Mutnik, as the press started to call it, was massive. Mutnik, yeah, that's what they called it. Sputnik.
I love it. I love it.
Shut up.
Yeah. It's good. It's clever. Later on, there become all kind of, when an American rocket fails, it gets called Kaputnik. It's wonderful. But yeah, Sputnik 2 was massive. At 1,120 pounds, it weighed almost as much as a nuclear warhead, and it was like clear evidence that the R-7 could drop bombs on the United States. Because like a month earlier with Sputnik 1, people were freaked out. They understood the message that like, hey, if we can put a satellite, we can drop a bomb. But there was at least still some like denial. There was some comfort in people's minds of like, oh, it's tiny. Like the Soviets published Sputnik 1's weight. It was 180 pounds. So people were able to kind of tell themselves like, oh, it can't launch a nuke. It can only launch a tiny thing like that. And then a month later, the Soviets follow it up with like, hey, we just launched this satellite. It's the size of a nuke. It's the shape of a nuke. And it looks exactly like it weighs as much as a nuke. Are you getting the message yet?
Has the message been received?
Meanwhile, in Moscow, Khrushchev was busy taking another victory lap. While Sputnik 1 was presented as the Soviets beating the odds by trouncing the great American superpower, by the time of the November celebrations, the tone had swung into full-on condescension of the Western powers. On the eve of the celebrations, Khrushchev lectured assembled communist leaders about the rightness of communist ideology and how it allowed them to transcend above the stagnation of capitalism. Pravda piled on, claiming that
the freed and conscientious labor of the people of the new socialist society makes the most daring dreams of mankind a reality.
And here's the best part. Pouring salt on the wound, Soviet delegates at the UN even suggested that America might qualify for technical assistance the USSR offered to developing countries.
Hey, America, you want some foreign aid funds?
Yeah, it's like, oh, they're so stupid over there. We need to help them.
Hey, listen, we'll send we'll send Enos over.
Do you want to send your students to our prestigious foreign university?
Listen, we'll send Enos over on a rocket and have you change your tone real quick.
Yeah, so in the US at least, like there is again panic, there is again like political, there's witch hunting. As we talked about with Sputnik, LBJ becomes like the big cheerleader for Sputnik panic, using it to like attack Eisenhower, who again, as with the first time, didn't learn his lesson. He tried to give a speech to calm down the American people and it didn't work. They did not want to hear an old dude tell them that everything was okay and that, don't worry, we have bombers. When like the Soviets, like Sputnik 1 is still in the air at this time. It is still going around and beeping. Like there is a period where Sputnik 1 and 2 overlap, where there is a live Soviet dog and a beeping ball over the heads of Americans. They know it is not okay. They do not want to be told that everything is fine.
Swiftly followed by a dead dog.
Yes. Yeah, because the dog died almost immediately. It also has to be said that like by the time like Laika launches on November 4th, she dies 6 hours into her mission. It's still November 4th. The celebrations roll around on November 7th. They are celebrating a dead dog. Like they're not telling anybody that. They're telling people like, it's tragic. We will have to euthanize the dog safely after 7 days in space because there's no way to bring her back down. In reality, she cooked alive. Like she is long dead by this time and the Soviets know it.
Let's parade the corpse a little harder, gentlemen.
Yeah. It's all, yeah, and the reason they hide this is, remember I mentioned that like it would kind of dampen their achievement if the dog died immediately. Like, yeah, the dog died immediately, and they just lied. So, why even launch a dog at that point? That's my question. Why even launch a dog?
You could have just said that you did it.
Listen,
Yes.
every single.
Why launch anything? There was no footage. There were no cameras inside the thing. Why not just take a picture of the dog in the capsule and then just
paste
okay,
it.
cool. They didn't get any science either, because they weren't bringing the dog down. Like, I need to. I know we talked, like, the whole point of the Soviet dog program was that they wanted to get more information out of the test subjects than the Americans got out of the Project Albert monkeys. And Laika, all they got was her heart rate. That's it. Like, they had to do surgery to get it. The reason why it's smart to bring an animal back down from space is because you get to look at that animal after. You don't have to rely on like transmitted. Yes, and like, here's an example. When the French launched a cat named Felicity, and yes, this is one of those things. Like, there is again a lot of like with Laika, there's a lot of space ethics stuff around Felicity, because they euthanized the cat after and like dissected her to see what the effects of space was. Even though this was in the 70s, this was in the 60s and 70s. Both the Americans and the US and the USSR had cosmonauts, had people in space, and the French were still like, we need to kill this cat. We need to know what space will do to people. Even though she was in space at the same time as like 5 other people.
The cat's dangerous. It has knowledge.
If the French got a hold of an astronaut or cosmonaut, they would just cut him open and just like, all right, we need to count tumors.
What do you mean there are no tumors?
But even then, like, as much as I can dislike that, at least they brought it back. At least they brought the test animal back. Like, if I don't know. Well, like, we'll get to this with the next section, which is the impact of Sputnik 2 and the actual like legacy and whatnot. But like, if an animal needs to die, use all of the buffalo is my attitude. I know that sometimes it happens. I believe it has to be justified. But like, if you're going to do it, don't waste it.
The impact of Laika and Sputnik 2.
Sputnik 2 was noteworthy for a lot of reasons. It was an extreme rush job completed in less than a month. It was a propaganda follow-up to Sputnik 1 that reinforced the world's perception that the USSR was a superpower, and it proved that the R-7 was capable of carrying nuclear warheads anywhere on the globe. The story of Laika, however, is complex. Her flight was conclusive evidence that living beings could survive and function in orbit, at least for a while, and she paved the way for future manned flights. While many Soviet dogs died during suborbital and orbital flights, only Laika's death was planned into the mission. And I need to make a point of this. It has to be said that the only reason she couldn't be recovered was because of the political pressure from the Kremlin. They were already planning on doing a dog launch. If Korolev and his engineers hadn't been rushing to meet Khrushchev's timeline, they would have planned to recover Laika, not just for ethics reasons, but because you get better data that way. 3 years later, Sputnik 5 would launch and recover 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka, marking the first time living creatures had been flown into orbit and actually survived.
I'm sorry, did you say Strelka or Belka?
Belka and Strelka, yes. Yeah, so it's kind of like I was saying, it's kind of a weird scenario, because I recognize that sometimes test animals do need to die. I don't like that.
But just as a sheer fact.
Yes, if it comes down to a human life, I'll weigh the human life over the test animal. However, like, the only reason Laika died, there is no scientific reason Laika had to die. The only reason was to fit Khrushchev's stupid timeline, because he wanted another one in time to woo Chairman Mao, which didn't work.
And also, in light of something else I believe we're going to talk about, it really doesn't work. That's a really good one. So
all in all, yeah, like there's a lot of different interpretations on Laika's flight and her death. But I think a great way to wrap things up is with a quote from Animals in Space that I think does a very good job of explaining the big picture. Quote, Many dogs played a critical role during the development of space travel, and like Laika, many paid with their lives. Yet none has come to symbolize that collective role of sacrifice more than a small dog from the streets of Moscow that became the first living being to travel in space. Whether the singular sacrifice of Laika was justified in the development of spaceflight is debatable. Certainly, her flight could have been delayed until a method of recovery existed, but that's where the politics comes in. The passage of time has given Oleg Gazenko a new perspective. The more time passes, the more I am sorry about it, he stated. We did not learn enough from this mission to justify the death of the dog. So, that's it. Hooray!
We did it.
My girl.
I shouldn't laugh. Yeah. So how are we all feeling after that?
I think
Not too great.
Do you okay? Do you feel like you at least learned something?
Yeah, we did.
That's the main goal.
This is grim.
It was more fun whenever we were just talking about Korolev accepting a horrible deal
and cheating on his wife.
Yeah. Well, and also just like I feel like with this topic, one of the main things to cover was like the getting Sputnik 2 ready to launch in less than a month stands out for me as something that people don't often realize, like how much of a rush job this was. This remains in history. Like no one else has built and launched a rocket this quickly.
Oh God, no!
Like,
the fact that
from
it even occurred
from start
is a
to
miracle.
finish, if anything, those mission times have gone up with like more safety and planning. Like they get this thing done. So yeah, they had 26 days from starting on October 12th. They launch on November 4th. They get it done in like 22 to 23 days. It's like just over 3 weeks.
Which is fucking nuts.
Yes, it is. And it is amazing that nothing else went wrong. However, I don't know. I don't want to editorialize because I don't know. There is a lot of information about this that we don't know because guess what? The satellite never came back down, so we don't know what went wrong.
I was just saying we got enough dead dogs.
Yes, and I think
it was the curse of Turatam.
Yeah.
All of the collective suffering of all the scientists and laborers who had to work there pooled into one congealed mass and launched with the rocket.
There's a psionic cloud of bad vibes hovering over Kazakhstan.
I think one of the workers slipped a scorpion in there with her and said, "This is for my homies back at Tiratam."
Oh, she'd murder that thing. She was a stray from the streets of Moscow.
Not when she's chained down.
She'd eat that thing.
Not when she's chained down in that capsule.
She still had... but like... I think there's a decent case to be made that whatever malfunction killed her, like, could very well have come from the fact that the spacecraft was a misplanned slapdash rush.
Everything traces back to that in the end because during any proper engineering exercise, you would account for variables. To claim that they wouldn't have accounted for a variable is just a slap in the face to all of those people that were given 1 month. Yeah. To do a fucking impossible...
To launch a rocket into space.
Yeah, to do this impossible task.
And, okay, like it's one of those things where they did it. It is a huge accomplishment for the sake that they did it, that they were able to get anything into space after 23 days. It is a failure because the thing that they failed their mission. They were supposed to keep a dog alive for 7 days.
It was a partial success.
It was a shit mission because they planned on that dog dying after 7 days, and it was an even shittier mission because the dog died after 6 hours because they fucked up the heat, the air conditioning. Like, remember, again, I don't want to editorialize too much on this, but like, remember when I told you that they got the air conditioning working by like cramming it into place and smashing it and stripping the bolts?
It's probably what killed it in the end. It's seriously all goes. Everything goes the same.
We don't know. Everything traces back to the rocket being incredibly poorly built.
No, what is it? That is absolutely what caused it because what's called?
Well,
air conditioners are not...
because the heat. It's also like I don't believe it was the cause of it was the air conditioner because the heat came from somewhere. Like the air conditioner was working. Maybe it wasn't working perfectly, but what they detected was that it was dealing with more heat than it was designed to.
Okay.
So like it's like a normal air conditioner. if you heat it, like there's only so much it can do.
Yeah, there's only so
Eventually, it
much
reaches its
energy
limit.
exchange.
And that's what happened in Sputnik 2. So the air conditioner was reasonably working, but there was outside heat coming from somewhere, whether that was the radiators not working on the satellite or the fact that like the heat in space, you can only radiate it. So like the heat from these white hot rocket
That were
engines
belching up.
was seeping and like I've worked on satellite thermodynamics.
It's heat conduction, right? It's going
Yeah,
from
it has to go
a
somewhere.
place where it's hot to a place that's cooler, and it's
it spreads through the satellite. So like it's very likely that Laika got cooked by the rocket heat, even though the rockets were like, I don't know, 200 feet away.
The heat can only go so many places in space.
Yes. Yeah, and they didn't have, the only radiators were possibly broken by the nose cone. We don't know.
Too many little things going on.
Thank you for listening to Failure to Launch. If you enjoyed the show, please leave us a review or tell a friend. Everything helps. If you want to follow us, contact us, or suggest a topic, you can email us at launchfailurepodcast@gmail.com. We're also on Twitter at launch_failure. Failure to Launch is hosted on Anchor, and we post on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. We also post our episodes with visual aids on YouTube at Failure to Launch. All music was provided by DJ Danarchy.